As part of her story, just as an aside, she showed me a picture on her back right here. It was like she had been branded with a hot iron. It took me a while to get over that picture. But there was a second incident. A lady came to see me, and she said to me she just needed to talk, and if I could please not write the things that she was going to say to me. So I obliged and just listened to her. She described how she'd been through a very difficult marriage, and both families, her husband's family and hers, had tried to resolve their differences many times, but it didn't work. A few days from the time she was speaking to me, they were going to try and resolve the problems once again. And if it didn't work, she'd come back and speak to me again. I didn't see this lady again for a very long time. Then one day, I saw her picture on the front page of a newspaper. She had died. I was heartbroken because I remembered her very, very well. I asked myself, when she came to see me, is there anything I could have said to her? Is there anything I could have done for her? Was there any way I could have intervened in her situation? Very interestingly, when I left that legal aid clinic, I went to work in a private law firm, and one of my colleagues was defending somebody who was alleged to have killed his wife. In fact, this lady's story was that she'd been thrown down by her husband. It was alleged that she'd been thrown down by her husband from a block of flats somewhere in the city of Accra where they lived. By the way, these people were two very well-educated people. So I decided to follow my colleague around court a few times to see how this story will end. The man walked scot-free because there was no evidence to convict him of any wrongdoing. Did he do it? We don't know. But if somebody had been able to say something to her, would this lady still be alive today? Could anybody have made any intervention? Would those 4 children still have a mother today? Our newspapers are replete with various headlines, such as these. Husband shoots wife for denying him sex. Jealous girlfriend stabs boyfriend for infidelity, and so on and so forth. By the way, these are from Ghanaian newspapers. They are not off the internet. We read them all the time. But when we talk about domestic violence, what really are we talking about? I like to use the term violence and abuse interchangeably. When we talk about domestic violence, for the purposes of this discussion, it's about all those forms of abuse or violence that people can suffer within their domestic setting. And what do I mean by domestic setting? We all live in close proximity with people whom we are related to, either by marriage, by blood, by adoption, or simply life just throws us all together in one place. But within those various relationships, amongst those people whom we expect to feel safe, sometimes the enemy lurks. So what types of abuse can there be? There may be physical abuse, emotional abuse, economic abuse, and I'm sure we can think of different types of abuse apart from these as well. But I'd just like to focus on some of these for today. Physical abuse is easy to describe. It shows on the person's body because there may be wounds, there may be lacerations, and so on. But the emotional abuse is more difficult. That happens on the inside of you. Those ones are very difficult to deal with because people don't necessarily know that you're suffering them. I'll give you an example. So take this young man. He's a chartered accountant. He's doing very well at his job. He works for a multinational company. He's married to Efia. They've been married for 2 years and have been trying to have a child without success. The one day, the lights go off in his life. He finds out that they cannot have children because he has a condition which means that he has a low sperm count and cannot make his wife pregnant. You see, it's not so much the receipt of the news that is his problem as the way his wife begins to respond to him, his mother-in-law, his sisters-in-law. He is reduced to zero in his own home. He hears incessant abuse and nagging from his wife all the time. And so he goes to work. This man who once upon a time was really sharp and was rising, and his employers liked him. He had a lot of subordinates. Suddenly, everyone notices that his work is beginning to slip. Something has gone out of his life, but nobody can quite put a finger on it because he's even unable to share it with people. In regular Ghanaian speak, you may say his life has been reduced to chia. He doesn't mean anything anymore in his home. So when he speaks, it doesn't mean anything to anyone. So he spends more time at work, but he's not improving. So one day he has one drink too many, is on his way home. He drives on the motorway like I do sometimes at night. It's very dark. There's a huge truck ahead of him. He can hear his wife taunting him in his mind as he's heading home. He doesn't see the truck ahead because it's also smoking. In his effort to dodge it, his car, his four-wheel drive, rolls off the motorway. I shall not tell you the end of that story. I leave it to your imagination. Economic abuse. It is the deliberate denial of sustenance for people for whom you are responsible for. For instance, parents refusing to pay their children's school fees, or even just providing food. I came across a story in a school very recently where a young lady walked up to me and said to me, "Auntie, can I share something with you?" I said, "Yes, go ahead." And she said to me, "What do you do when you find yourself in a relationship that you do not really want to be in?" I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, I've been living with this man since I was in JSS 2. He pays my school fees, and I stay with him when school is on vacation. But evidently, he's also sleeping with me, and I don't want that to happen." This young girl is about 15. So I asked her about her family. She said her parents were divorced, her father was remarried, and he didn't want her in his home. Her mother didn't want her either. She lived somewhere in the Ashanti region with her own mother. So she and her younger sister had been left to their own devices, and they needed to fend for themselves. So to look after herself, she was compelled to stay with this man. I was stumped. I didn't know what to say to her. Someone has to make some interventions on the behalf of this girl. I have a few pictures I'd like to show you, and I have to warn you that they may be disturbing. This first one here, this young boy is 8, or at least was 8 at the time he suffered these injuries. His father beat him for stealing 2 CDs. Tell me, how much is it going to cost to treat a child with such injuries? Certainly it will cost more than 2 CDs. But how about the emotional trauma he has suffered? Who is going to be dealing with that? Mind you, he was beaten by his own father. So who can he turn to? Who would he speak to? This little girl's hands were burnt on a lantern. You know those lanterns used in some places for decorative purposes, but in this current doomsaw, you use it for light. So the glass part of that lantern, her hands were put on it. And so now what you see are her palms bandaged because of the wounds she suffered. Who is this young child going to be turning to when she gets over those injuries? What has she suffered? Is it just the physical? I dare say it is more than that. Will this child be able to continue in school? I don't know. Well, there's this woman whose husband mutilated her body like that with a machete. The reason was that she denied him sex. What is this woman ever going to be able to do again? She has lost one hand completely. The other side of her body is badly mutilated. What kind of economic activity is she ever going to be able to engage in again? Remember, the person who inflicted the wounds upon her is her husband, a man she has loved, a man she has lived with for many, many years. The final one is terrible. This woman was only 23 when her boyfriend poured acid on her. And her crime? She wanted to know if he was having an affair with another woman. I look at this picture, and I want you to imagine if this woman was in the 3rd year of university, for instance, studying marketing when she suffered those injuries. Assuming she's able to recover a little bit, but she still has scars like that. If she approached you to work in your firm, would you employ her to be the face of your company? Or what else do you think this woman will be able to do in future? Would she be able to get married and have children? Would she be able to live any form of a normal life? This is scary, but it happened to her in a place where she thought she was safe. So who does domestic violence affect? Clearly, the first person affected is the individual who suffers it, whether it is physical, emotional, or economic. But I tell you, it is not just that person. The victim suffers, friends and family suffer, because they must look after the person who has suffered all of this. But society at large also suffers, even though we may not realize it. Now, when people have been so traumatized, when people have suffered so badly, their ability to contribute to our collective well-being is badly diminished. And so our nation also suffers. So how can we make a difference? I urge everyone in this room, first of all, not to be a perpetrator. But beyond that, you mustn't take violence if you are receiving it. If you're in a relationship and it's abusive, even before you get married, don't say to yourself, it will get better when we get married, because it won't. You owe it to yourself to protect yourself. We need to look out for those who are vulnerable around us. Some of us live with aging parents, and we need to leave them in the care of other people when we go to work. When we come back home, if you hear complaints from those aging parents, I urge you to investigate them. There may be something going on that you're not seeing. My husband told me the story once of some children in his neighborhood when he was growing up. There was a very old lady in that home. She was the grandmother of the children, and she'd been branded a witch. And so really nobody paid much attention to her. He said one day the children in that house put a stone in fire and put it in their grandmother's hand. Can you imagine what this grandmother must have felt? But I'd like to know where the children's parents were. And I'd like to know what kind of redress or what kind of actions they took after that. Did they even find out? Did they even know? Now we have children also at home. Women and children, incidentally, are the worst hit when it comes to domestic violence. But talking about children, if you can bathe your own children, little children, it's best to do that. One of my mentors taught me very early on that when you bathe children yourself, you can very quickly tell when there are changes in their body. When you're bathing them and they have bumps and lacerations on their body, you will feel it very quickly, and you can begin to ask questions. It's a very difficult thing, however, when this child who is being abused is the parent. I'll tell you one last story before I conclude. I had to be involved once in a suit where a father was trying to claim access to his children from his wife. Unfortunately for him, the children were very young, so the mother was given sole custody of the children. But he said to me he needed to take his children out of this woman's care, even though no one believed him, because the kind of abuse that their mother meted out to them, nobody would believe him. And one of the things he shared with me was that the mother of these children, they had a little boy at the time, he said the mother would suck the little boy's penis, and he happened upon it one day. It's a revolting story. But that's the parent of that child. We need to be vigilant. We need to be alert. We need to listen and be aware of these things that can happen right within our homes. So I hope that all these things I have shared with you today has given you some information. You feel a little more empowered to be able to do something about these situations, at least to be able to listen when somebody speaks to you about what they are going through. I believe in Ghana. I think that we have a beautiful nation. There are many things that aren't working right now. But if we all pitch in and do our very little bit, it is possible for us to make our homes a little safer. Let's begin to deal with the enemy within. Domestic violence. Let's help stop the violence. Don't give violence. Don't take the violence. Thank you very much.